And all right, very good. So I'm going to admit now. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Ilya Umanskiy. I think very, very glad to see you all. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to pass it to Rob to start us off, and we'll move on from there.
So all, thank you for joining me and my guest, Ilya Umanskiy, the founder and director of Spere State, which is a risk management and asset protection specialist. Ilya and I have worked together on more than a dozen nonprofit security grant projects just over the past year for Jewish, Muslim, and Hindu communities, merging his threat and vulnerability assessment expertise and my grant writing capabilities. Ilya came highly recommended to me by the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, which for more than 20 years has provided security assistance to the largest Jewish community in the United States, located in the biggest recipient area of the federal nonprofit security grant program by both funding and volume. I do note that JCRC of New York also assists many non-Jewish organizations throughout the region as well, and makes its online tools and resources available to all interested parties. Ilya continues to consult with JCRC's Community Security Initiative, and since 2005 has completed hundreds of TVAs and other projects for nonprofit communities across the United States and abroad. Ilya and Spere State are valuable industry experts in security technology, blast and structural reinforcement and hardware, security team training, and grant projects management. Today's conversation comes ahead of the next federal nonprofit security grant opportunity, and in the midst of a gravely elevated threat environment. NSGP begins with a TVA and ends with an application that many nonprofits find difficult to navigate. Most nonprofits are not government contractors, yet are required to master the NSGP application, whose forms and format are largely the byproducts of FEMA state, local, and private sector government grants and procedures. NSGP is one of about a dozen FEMA state and local grant programs where law enforcement and first responders are the primary stakeholders for which the processes were designed. When it comes to guidance on meeting the TVA requirement, however, FEMA's Notice of Funding Opportunity provides minimally that an applicant must submit, quote, one vulnerability assessment per location, end quote. That is the sum total of direction. And FEMA's Preparedness Grants Manual minimally adds, quote, NSGP funds must address a specific threat and/or vulnerability as identified in the nonprofit organization's investment justification, end quote, which I add must be supported in the TVA. That too is the sum total of direction. And while FEMA provides no express standards for TVAs, this lack of guidance should not be construed as a lack of importance FEMA places on the TVA, just the opposite. FEMA values a quality TVA to provide nonprofits with the understanding of their potential vulnerabilities and the identification of options for consideration in mitigating those vulnerabilities. As a competitive program, FEMA, a steward of limited government resources, seeks to fund improvements in facility security, preparedness, and emergency planning for those nonprofits that show a proficiency in determining threat, vulnerability, and consequence, and mitigation through efficient and effective allowable investments. The heart of the application is predicated on a quality TVA, which can increase the security intelligence, or IQ, of the nonprofit and make the grant writing simpler, more fluid, and succinct. In my view, Ilya and Spere State offer the gold standard in threat and vulnerability assessment, and I am pleased to pass the mic over to Ilya for further discussion on this important topic. Before I do, I remind that the webinar is being recorded, and I do encourage you all to be active and inquisitive participants as the webinar proceeds. And with that, I give you Ilya.
Rob, thank you so much, and welcome everyone. So very interesting, Rob. You just brought up the word IQ. I'm very grateful that I've been learning and increasing my IQ by working with you. My expertise is definitely not in grant writing. And so therefore, much of what I have done and what my firm has done has been in collaboration with Rob and under his guidance and developing a joint effort to help make your lives a little bit easier when it comes to getting through this entire process and maximizing your chances of receiving grants and serving your communities. And with that, I also want to acknowledge, and I say this pretty much at the beginning of every webinar I'm part of, is that how much we are grateful for you to allocate time as your bandwidths, I'm sure, are occupied with many other requirements, many other tasks. And so we are grateful for your service to the community. We're grateful for how much you contribute. And I think we are doing everything in our power to make the process of at least maximizing the chances and applying for grants easier. That's where Rob's expertise comes in. So, with such importance, because he monitors, and I'm sure you see this, he monitors how the federal government and multiple states are approaching grant announcements and how they're what's allowed, what's not allowed, the timing of these things. So amid all that complexity, we've developed something that I'll share with you in terms of a proper threat and vulnerability assessment, which is a significant component of your application. And we completely respect that you might have different resources for preparing these TVAs. Some of you may have done a self-assessment. Today, I don't want to occupy too much time, and we also want to be respectful of everybody's time, but we want to share with you some of the attributes of the proper threat and vulnerability assessment. But before we get into that, I have to tell you who I am. You might not have heard about me. This is probably the first time that you're hearing my name and the name of my firm. But these are some of the few, I guess, highlights from my career. And I've been very privileged to have served the nonprofit community, both in the States and abroad. Since 2005, roughly. And also that probably is around the same time when the US government started releasing grants, the counterterrorism grants. And so I've also been working with JCRC for many, many years. Even before they developed the program that's called Community Security Initiative, I was one of the first assessors working on multiple threat and vulnerability assessments. What I want to share with you is that this website, csiny.org, is superbly helpful. It's a humble plug for an organization that's been investing quite a bit into teaching the community about and sharing a lot of resources with the community. So if you learn nothing else, at least you've received a link to a valuable resource. And Rob and I obviously will be happy to take your questions after this webinar, either about this resource and many other things that you'll hear today. I have contributed either directly or indirectly to more than $20 million in grant awards. I think that number continues to increase simply because I haven't stopped working with the nonprofit community, and I know that the team I'm supporting also does quite a few assessments of their own, and I serve in a more technical role, helping the team do a good job, doing sometimes quality control on their work, and also then supporting clients both before they've applied, just to make sure that all of the security questions and their concerns have been answered in preparation for their application, and also supporting clients after they have received a grant award. Overall, I have more than 24 years of experience in security, all of it, and I want to highlight that. All of my experience is in the private sector. I've started my career having graduated from John Jay College of Criminal Justice with a master's degree in New York, and then I worked for Prudential Financial in Newark, New Jersey for 6 years. Then I worked with a major global consultancy called Kroll for 11 years. And then I've been running Spere State since 2017. So I've been probably to over 30 countries, if not more. I've done quite a few international projects. Some of them are for major international nonprofit organizations. One of the key projects that I've done in the US is the renovation and security consulting for the United Nations headquarters in New York City. And at the bottom bullet describes a few other projects that I have completed while serving the variety of my clients. Today's discussion will center on the difference between what many consider to be, what they expect to be a threat and vulnerability assessment, and what competent security consultants want to see from a threat and vulnerability assessment, particularly those which serve the purposes of grant applications. So please understand that there's a difference. If I were to do a threat and vulnerability assessment for just a regular financial organization or an insurance company or various other sectors, and it wasn't grant related, there would be many other components that would go into such assessments. However, for grant purposes, because grants cover only a specific set of security controls, particularly related to reduction of hate crimes and acts of terror, these types of threat and vulnerability assessments are more tailored, and they're a little bit more narrow in scope. However, please note the word always. And this is something that I encourage you to reflect on after this webinar, if you choose to review the recording of it, or if you're taking some notes. These are some of the key attributes that you should be expecting from a professionally conducted and then reported threat and vulnerability assessment. So, needless to say, the first bullet is that an assessment of this type will always be tailored to a specific site, organization type, and programmatic attributes. I've had many clients who would come to us and ask, well, we have 3 sites and we just want you to do 1 TVA. And unfortunately, it's not that I would just reject that request. It's actually the granting organizations, both at the federal level and at the state level, require that a TVA must be conducted per address. And so whenever there's a request, well, we have multiple campuses or multiple facilities at different addresses or different cities even, a threat and vulnerability assessment has to be tailored to a specific facility at a specific address. Then, of course, there will be difference between organizations of different types. For example, a school would have a different set of factors that would need to be considered versus a place of prayer. Sometimes these organizations are hybrid. Sometimes the same facility could house facilities and spaces for education and education for children, and sometimes childcare in general, and it will have places for prayer, and it will have other programmatic attributes. For example, they might host community events of all sorts. It could be lectures, it could be family celebrations, and what have you. So we're cognizant that when even let's say a temple hosts prayers, that's not the only thing it does. It also helps community to come together for a variety of reasons, right? And so an assessment will take all of that into consideration. There will be multiple other factors that we have to review. The number of people at a maximum capacity, if you will, the distribution between the number of adults versus the number of children, be it on a daily basis or for major events. Various types of security controls that already exist. But you know where you can see where I'm going with this. The threat and vulnerability assessment always relies on credible sources for analysis of threats. So it's one thing to pick up a newspaper and read up on a few articles about incidents that could be qualified as acts of hate crime or acts of terror, but that's not enough. That's not sufficient. There are credible organizations across the United States that keep very accurate records of various types of incidents that occur against different types of faith-based communities. And so Rob and I have been working with a multitude of different communities, of different faith denominations. And for each of those, we have to look at different sources of information in order to assess the level of threat. It could be geographically related in addition to the specific faith denomination, or it could be a combination of these factors. And so it has to be based not only on what the news media publishes, but also on what credible organizations that can run decent statistics publish. In one of the recent reports, it was for one of the minority faith-based community in the United States. It took quite a bit of time to try to understand what kinds of threats they were exposed to. And interestingly, not being a Jewish institution, they were located in a predominantly Jewish area. So we had to approach the threat assessment by looking at collateral targets as well. So if, let's say, there is a Jewish facility across the street or in a few blocks away from our facility that we're assessing, the threat to that community, to that facility, the neighboring facility, would also be taken into account. So we typically take a look at the geography and the neighbors and what kinds of facilities are nearby, and I'll demonstrate that to you in an example. The TVA always provides in-depth technical and operational recommendations. I'll give you an example later on, but please understand that if I tell you, please install some video surveillance, I hope by now you appreciate that you can buy video surveillance for, let's say, $1,000 for, let's say, 4 cameras and a small recorder. And you can buy that just by going online, Amazon, right? Very easy. Or you could buy industrial grade equipment that lasts long, that has a warranty, that has local dealers who can come and support that particular system. All of that is taken into consideration. And in addition, the technical features, for example, the level of clarity of the video signal is very important. Some cheap cameras will likely not achieve the same level of quality that is necessary, for example, to operate in evening conditions. Okay, they can work pretty well during daylight, but they may not be enough or have the right features to support the evening operations when lighting is low. So we take a lot of time to analyze what current technologies are available, how they operate, obviously relying on the years of experience, having designed technological controls for various facilities, and also having run multiple bid exercises and then project implementation oversight for a variety of organizations, be it nonprofit or commercial organizations and government facilities. TVA will always or should always provide budgetary considerations and suggested prioritization. I've had a client who came to us and said, all we want is video. That's our main thing. We want to install a lot of video surveillance. And when we looked at their facility, we realized that they don't have any protection around the perimeter of their property. That's number one. They don't have any security guard presence. They don't really have resources in-house. Even if I were to recommend a video surveillance system, they don't have anybody trained or even available to monitor that system. Because it does require calibration, it requires occasional monitoring or sometimes proactive monitoring. So there are a lot of considerations that need to go into this. And we talk about budgets. And when our let's say an application is reviewed, if you put all your eggs in one basket, let's say all you want is video surveillance, and you're willing to spend all your money on just that one control, likely somebody will raise a hand on the government side and ask you, why is that you're trying to only protect your facility with a single control? Security doesn't work that way. Security is a puzzle. You put the pieces of the puzzle together. It's a combination of perimeter physical protection like fencing, gates, and so on, and vehicle interdiction measures. It's a combination of human capital, such as security officers. It's a combination of technologies, and not just video, but you might need intercom systems, you might need access control systems, you might need intrusion detection systems. All of that in combination will increase your chances of having a good security program. And on top of all that, there is a lot of management that's involved, because I've seen facilities which acquire a lot of security controls across the ones that I just mentioned, and everything appears to be working, but when a professional arrives at the site, let's say a year from then, and reviews the operations, nothing's working. It's what's called security theater. So we help prioritize, we help align some budgetary considerations, which, by the way, works in perfect unison with Rob's activities of having to complete a grant application when he's working with a client. So a TVA will also caution about additional challenges. For example, there's such a thing as fire safety. If I'm locking all the doors in your facility as part of my security controls, I also have to be cognizant of what the local fire code dictates. If I'm violating fire code, my security system is not good, because the fire marshal at one point will arrive and will require some changes. Let's say, let's be polite, or they'll simply say, you can't operate, or they'll say, you can't lock these doors anymore, because none of the hardware that you installed is compliant with the local fire code. Okay, so there are challenges that go above and beyond what you typically just want from a set of security controls. Lots of considerations. Security, unfortunately, and I've been saying this for years, I used to teach security at a master's degree program. That was just one program at one college in one city, right? Security, unfortunately, does not have a sufficient academic base where you have all the research, all of the labs and testing and so on, and scientific papers published. However, certain bits and pieces are understandable. And so these additional challenges, they do come into play. I'll also give you an example of that in just a few minutes. And last but not least here is TVA always references industries, standards, and best practices. For example, there's a big difference if somebody tells you you have to achieve a 10-minute forced entry protection, and actually referring to a standard that none of the standards actually talk about a 10-minute time frame. They talk about 5 minutes or 15. Okay, and that could be the difference between the capability of your local police department to be able to make it to your facility, right? And actually how contractors react to when you tell them, well, actually it has to be built to the standard. It's an industry standard, right? And so we typically build our assessments and use reference sources that rely heavily on the best industry practices and industry standards. So this is something that I would recommend for your consideration. Now, the use of the TVA appears to be very straightforward, right? You're using this as part of your application. However, the way the TVAs can be written is very different. I could have a single section that takes the reader from the introduction all the way through in very dense text, all the way through all of the recommendations and the threat assessment and so on. And everything is pretty much jammed together, and it then concludes with some sort of statements, right? It could be a fairly dense narrative. However, it becomes very different and challenging to parse through the language from the assessor and then use that language to cut and paste into the right section of your grant application portal. The way we've structured our TVAs, our reports, is it aligns specifically with how the language from the TVA is supposed to be copied and pasted into individual grant application sections. So that helps reduce the time and the guesswork about what needs to be included in order to both satisfy the minimum requirements and also impress those that will be reviewing your applications. So that's bullet one. On top of that, a well-written TVA is not just for the purposes of the grant. It should incentivize discussions among senior leaders in the organization about how to manage security, okay? For example, there's a big difference between hiring armed security personnel versus unarmed security personnel. And with each, there is a set of different challenges, okay? With unarmed security personnel, for the most part in the United States, you get bodies in uniform. Okay, these are folks that look the part, right? But they are poorly trained. They're not making a whole lot of money, and their attention span drifts, especially around mealtime. And unfortunately, they don't have the right level of training and experience to serve in the capacity of an early warning facilitator. Because all security officers need to do is to serve two purposes. One, early warning, and second, response. So I've used, and I didn't prepare it for this conversation, but I've used an amazing photo, which I got off of Google Earth. It's from Brooklyn, New York, and it's for a facility that I found on Google Earth on Street View. And there's a security officer that has headphones in his ears, and his head is down, and he's looking at his smartphone. I did not take that photo. This was done by a passing Google Earth car, right? So that's a fantastic example of what we typically observe, is that, yes, you're buying a service, but the quality of that service, in most cases, is not sufficient to be called security guarding. So that's something we cover in our TVAs, and that's that additional language, that bonus language that we produce, and it helps guide the decision makers at your organizations towards making the right choices and towards scrutinizing the services that they're buying. Because Rob and I have seen numerous facilities win grants, get a lot of money, spend a lot of money, and then the next year we arrive and nothing works. But they believe that they've increased security. But what they've done is they've introduced complexity and a lot of what's called, like I said, security theater. There's a belief that things are working, but in reality they don't. So that's even worse. The technical language from the TVA can be used and copied and pasted into requests for proposal. So that's bonus number 3. outside of your applications, outside of the guidance to, to the senior decision makers within your organizations, you can take the technical language that is present in a well-written TVA and copy and paste it into a request for proposal. Now, why is that important? Because, and I say this with utmost respect, none of you, I suspect, are security practitioners. None of you understand how to acquire, how to procure security solutions. Okay, and yet you're being put, or at least from my experience, typical people that are the champions for nonprofit organizations, they're at best very good project managers. They don't really understand security, right? And so they need a lot of support to take the right language that the security contractors understand very well, and at least be at the same kind of level of requirements. Otherwise, right, you will see RFPs that will say, we need guarding services. The guards need to wear a uniform and they need to abide by the following schedule. And those are the only requirements. That's not nearly enough, because you're missing the entire quality piece of how security guarding provider needs to perform day to day. What kind of quality you're expecting. So the language in the TVA, in a well-written TVA, will help enable those additional quality requirements. Last but not least, a single TVA for a single facility not only is good for your current grant application, but it works for the following 2 years. So with the current year, the current application, that's year 1, you can reuse the same assessment for the next 2 years. Okay, so we suggest that you might want to refresh. Let's say if you have done some renovations of the facility, if your programmatic services have changed, if the type of general services you offer to your community has changed. It's important to update the report, but not to rewrite it. So we've done a lot of what's called refresher TVAs. Fewer hours, but they basically just take stock of what's happening today versus a year ago. And with that, you can feel confident about your grant application and stating your needs. Moving on. One moment, I'll jump to the next slide. I'm a professional. I've been in this industry, like I said, over 24 years. I have certifications to demonstrate my competence. I've worked around the world. I don't do my work for free. So when somebody hires me, they hire me as a consultant, and I say this, the same is true for Rob. Professionals will be happy to take your call, to speak with you, to give you a little bit of guidance, but typically the rest of their time needs to be compensated. That's the right way of doing it. You wouldn't want a security contractor who's installing your systems or a guarding provider to give you free stuff. I mean, it's nice, but they won't do it, right? So why should it be expected from professionals such as myself and Rob? However, there are assessments, either self-assessments or assessments conducted by local law enforcement that I have seen, and I've received them as part of either my consulting services or by virtue of being connected to the community. The disconnect is in the depth of detail. And this is the bullet 1. So professional TVA will always be a lot more detailed. Like I said, you can take a look if you received an assessment from, let's say, a local law enforcement. Have a look at what level of detail they provide in terms of security technologies. It will be fairly basic. They might say install cameras, make sure that they're high resolution, and they don't go beyond that. They might say install a fence, but they will not tell you whether this fence needs to be anti-climb and what height and so on and so forth, and what material the fence should be made of. They might say hire security guards but they will not go into details in terms of how these guards need to perform and what policies and procedures you need to surround that operation with in order for it to be successful. Because you can't just hire guards and not have documentation to guide you as to how you're going to manage that, right? And any security upgrade requires a new set of policies and procedures. So the professional TVA will go well beyond what is required in the grant application. I've already given you a few examples of that and a few benefits of that, but basically it serves as the roadmap for your organization for improving your entire security program. Unlike the self-assessments and those assessments that are free, the typical TVA will have been provided by a person who's competent in their field. Security is markedly different from law enforcement. Those are not the same things. In fact, I have taught law enforcement professionals who have been transitioning from their first career to the career in security in the private sector. And the gap is significant. It's significant. So once again, it's not like they cannot be trained, but there's a lot of work to be done to retrain and prepare law enforcement personnel for work in private security sector. And the TVA helps avoid risks associated with security improvements. I'll give you a few examples. So, what do you see? You see a satellite image of what appears to be a camp facility somewhere in the United States. And if you simply see that, that's your context. You see that there is a county route, a highway, local highway that runs near the facility. It runs along its perimeter. You see that majority of the area outside of where the buildings are is wooded. So seems like it's not a city environment. More likely it's going to be a rural or semi-rural environment, right? And yeah, there's context. You could count the number of buildings. You could count the proximities among those buildings. But that's about it until you start looking at additional context, which is that there is a county airport that's located less than a mile away from that camp. All of that is material to the threat level. But if you don't take those things into consideration, like nearby government facilities, even the United States Postal Service office, right? Likely your threat assessment will be more shallow. So again, security practitioners that I know will always look at the radius of at least 3 to 5 miles around a specific facility to build their threat assessment, because there are many collateral targets that would contribute to the target attractiveness of that camp that we referred to. So when there's a county airport, what do you think will happen with that county airport if the camp is attacked? It'll be shut down. And vice versa. If the airport is attacked, the camp will not operate. So that's one of the examples. Now, what you see before you, it almost looks like it's the same camera. I mean, to an unprofessional eye, untrained eye, you could choose either the one on the left or on the right. Seems to be very similar. Only one of the two cameras, even though they do actually, based on their product literature and as they are advertised, they have very similar features. That's true. But one of the cameras happens to have been banned by the US government. And so if you buy that camera, you will not be able to use your grant money. Now, I would love to hear which one of the two cameras, the one on the left or on the right, is banned. And if you ever heard of either of these brands. And if you haven't, right, that is the depth of knowledge you need to have in order to actually install and implement good security systems, including video surveillance. So what we do, and we've been doing this for, as I said, since 2005, but more with greater depth probably in the last 6 years. These are the points that we help cover for our clients. Post-award assistance, we obviously do TVAs, as you have already learned, but when facilities win grants, when they receive the money, they're still none the wiser about how to structure their implementation. What should it look like? What documentation is needed? And if you haven't heard of what the EHP is, right, that's one of the key documents based on which your grant rep will be giving you approval to proceed with your security projects. So if you haven't prepared an EHP, you won't be able to implement any security solutions, right? That's in relation to NSGP grants, the federal grant, right? Our clients continue to have gaps in their competence about sourcing contractors and doing due diligence on those contractors, right? So you can have a security integrator or people that can install fencing and so on. And let's say they're located somewhere in a 10 to 15 mile radius. They're neighbors, right? They're not far. And therefore, it obviously appears that they might be well suited to execute a project. But what if they're bankrupt? What if the typical customer opinion of that company is very poor and it's actually public? So I've helped one of the clients who was looking to hire a particular security integrator. I simply found a lot of public commentary about that company and how they not only mistreat their clients, but also mistreat their subcontractors. One subcontractor hadn't gotten paid at all well after having completed the job for that company. And so they weren't necessarily, ranting. They basically said, look, you can certainly choose that company, but please remember that they like to play games, and we haven't been paid by them. So there's lots of nuance, if you will, in how you source contractors. Bid administration requires a lot of good project management skills, for one, and secondly, because it's specific bid administration, it requires knowledge of security systems or security solutions. If you have gaps in that knowledge in-house, then at least I would recommend to speak with someone to learn more about what you're sourcing, what should it look like, and what kind of requirements for quality and for longevity of those security controls you need to put into your RFP. For example, if you haven't heard of a term change order, right? That is one of the key components that dishonest contractors use to lowball the project at the entry when they bid on a project. Let's say they're the lowest bidder, but they know that they can, because the client doesn't know any better, they can use a change order once they've been awarded the project and say, well, you know what, your scope doesn't cover this particular component, so we need you to pay more, right? So I helped one of the clients basically put a clause in their contract. Change orders will not be entertained unless they're initiated by the customer, because that helps keep the contractor on their toes when they're pricing their job from the beginning, because your budget is finite. So they shouldn't take advantage of you. You have a finite budget to spare, right? Whether it's a grant award or if you're doing a combination of your private funds and grant award, whatever that is, right? You want to make sure that you can account for the budget that you've allocated for this, and that people don't go over that budget. So bid administration has a lot of its own nuances. Implementation oversight. If you simply go and Google a messy IT closet, you'll know what I mean. All right. There's a lot of quality issues in implementation. Poorly labeled cables that are not well secured, devices that are poorly installed. All because contractors don't want to spend a whole lot of time on your site. They want to install quickly and leave. And when they do jobs quickly without good quality control and good oversight, unfortunately, you get poor quality implementation. So then that significantly reduces the longevity of security controls that you've installed. That also could potentially void the warranty right from the beginning. So if you think you have it for a year, you may not. And so that could cause multiple additional challenges. And on top of that, we also get calls from our clients who want to understand how to build further security strategies for their facilities. What should they be focusing on, let's say, for the next 2 to 3 years, right? And so we serve in the role of a fractional security director. Typically, those are small chunks of hours allocated per month, where a client of ours can just use our time and our expertise to consult with us and sometimes ask us to deliver some documentation, policies, procedures, or maybe do some training for them, or maybe come to the site and do certain types of spot inspections and stuff like that, or maybe connect them with additional resources. All of that is available, and it's almost like you don't have to hire a security director if you can't afford one, but you can allocate a much smaller budget to actually consult with the security practitioner. This is something that we can tailor to your needs, and we scale our support depending on the available budget. That's the best part. Is clients, we understand that in nonprofits, for the most part, don't have huge budgets. And a lot of money goes towards supporting the community, not just towards security. Security is important, but serving the community is what's fundamentally far more important. And so we respect it, and all we need is a call, just to have a conversation and then say, okay, look, it seems like you need this. We agree. It looks like it might require, let's say, 10 to 15 hours of work, and that's that. And then that budget can be allocated easily because it's not very high. And sometimes those budgets are available through grants, because grants not only cover solutions, but they also cover consulting services, what's called management administration, and also training services. So consider that as well. I will stop now. We're closing in on the hour, so I want to pass it back to Rob. I'm grateful for your attention, and thank you very much for listening. Q&A is for you, so if you haven't been placing any questions in the chat, which I don't see any, please unmute yourself and please ask questions, or if you are a bit more shy, please put your question in the chat.
And you can
And
also,
over to you, Rob.
thank you very much, Ilya. Very fascinating aspects of your discussion. I've worked on grant writing for this program for over 20 years myself, and I have a full page of notes that I've taken on how I'm going to improve my grant writing process, just based on a number of things that you talked about. So I learned a lot, and I appreciate very much your time and discussion. I mean, for me, we're all here as part of the need to change our culture to more of a security footing, and that has only increased over the last few decades. First, we recognized there was an issue, and now today we live in an environment where the issues have escalated. And for me, the fundamental component really is the vulnerability assessment. It is the cornerstone of everything that goes forward, on the security footing. You can't know where you're going if you don't have a roadmap to get there, and the TVA is that, and the NSGP grant program is based on that principle. And if you break down the NSGP application into its 7 components, you realize how much of the heart of it is really seeking folks to pull out from their TVA the essential information in that TVA to express it within the application. And it really is, the application is basically a summary of the critical components of the TVA. And I don't think that a lot of folks really understand the nexus between the two components of the application, the TVA and the application itself. So for me, as I've worked with you on more than a dozen projects and having drafted more than 100 applications, for me it's just very important to provide this webinar in this context to bring home just the sheer importance of the TVA to the entire process and ultimately to securing nonprofit communities. So with that, I will stop. You still are controlling the meeting, Ilya, so I don't see the chat questions.
No worries.
I leave
Rob,
it to
can you
you.
just, yeah, no worries. Thank you so much. Rob, we have a question and I already replied in chat, but I wanted to ask maybe for you to elaborate a little bit. Environmental and historic preservation, the EHP. Could you go into a few more details on why that's important, why that's required? How does it serve the exchange between the grantee and the granting agency? If you could just offer your thoughts, please.
Sure. I know in my opening remarks, I talked about the fact that the Nonprofit Security Grant Program is an animal of the federal grant process writ large, where most of the end users are professional law enforcement or first responders or other professionals in the field. The EHP is another one of those formalities required of all of FEMA's federal grants. So it's not particular to the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, but it is a critical prerequisite, post-award prerequisite to getting the release of funds. And it is what its name says. It's to certify that the investments provided through this program do not alter or damage the environment or the historic aspect of a facility, a property, a premise, the premises. And it's one of these things where the more complex the request, the more complex the application in and of itself becomes. So if you are an applicant who is installing video surveillance as a fixture to the building, and the building is not considered a historically significant building, then the EHP form is fairly short and simple to respond to. If, on the other hand, it is a 200-year-old building and drilling holes into the facade may permanently damage or alter in some significant way this building from a historical perspective, then the application process and certification for approval may become more complex. Similarly, if you were disturbing ground, like digging trenches or holes, perhaps to put up a lighting pole, that could create a more complex certification application but it may not. So, the EHP is required of everyone. FEMA does put out guidance and tutorials on how to satisfy it. I believe that if they secure more resources this fiscal cycle, we'll see FEMA put more resources to helping sub-awardees, successfully navigate the EHP. The EHP often is, comes as can be another stumbling block to successfully receiving funds, because there might be a backlog at FEMA to go through the forms, because it's a requirement of many programs, not just NSGP. So where we are in line may impact how quickly they get back to us. Also, states may have their own EHP requirements in addition to the federal. And so depending on the state, there may be other EHP requirements as well to satisfy in addition to the federal requirements. But bottom line, this program, NSGP, has served 10,000 post-award nonprofits who have successfully navigated the EHP process. And I have navigated it twice when I was managing projects in the past, and can just tell folks that with the right focus and attention, any organization can successfully satisfy the EHP as well.
Thanks, Rob. I just want to add that in order to put the EHP together, you need to demonstrate where you're putting all of your security controls, particularly hardware. So that takes knowledge, it takes time, and not every client will be, how shall I say, not every client will be able to intelligently complete that piece of, prepare that piece of information. Now, doesn't mean, please remember that people on the grant approval side, right, those that approve your projects, they're not security practitioners either. So when you tell them, okay, well, here's where I'm thinking of putting all my controls, right? And even if, let's say, to a security practitioner's eye, maybe you could have done a better job. And we don't blame you for that because you're not security practitioners. It's understood, right? But that could create this vicious cycle that the grant rep approves it. You start doing a project, and then because you didn't put in, you didn't know how to prepare the EHP properly, your projects are going in in the wrong direction, right? So there is some intricacies in how that information needs to be put together, particularly for the continuity reasons, because when you start, from the time that you submit the EHP to the time that you get approval and you can run the bids and start implementing your project, might take months and months. So there has to be continuity of reference materials so that everybody knows that what the scope of the projects is.
I would just add that in terms of the TVA and its relationship to EHP and other aspects on the implementation side, is that the mitigation that a professional TVA assessor may recommend will take into account the complexity of what that mitigation is. And FEMA and the state reviewers are looking for efficiency and efficacy of the mitigation that are recommended and implemented. So certainly taking into account whether or not a mitigation step is going to create an environmental or historic impact is something that an assessor is going to look at as well on the front end of the TVA.
Yeah, good point. So next one is we received a TVA from Secure Community Network. Do you recommend receiving more than one TVA to have a different view from another person? Well, Rob and I have kind of slightly different angles of experience with Secure Community Network, which I believe, in short, is SCAN. Rob, correct me if I'm wrong. No, I would never recommend that you get 2 TVAs. However, follow the guidance that I've given you. Remember the slide with the words always, right? Scrutinize the next TVA you receive from anybody, right? Across the number of those items. The slide with the words always. Let me actually get back to that. Hold on a moment. Let me see if I can real quickly jump to that. So you can see, right? Take a look at the SCAN assessment. Make sure that they haven't assumed that you're security professionals, because that is the threat. That is actually not the threat, but the risk of a lot of TVAs. They assume that the client is well versed in security, because they give you. Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
No, I was going to say, not to speak specific to any one assessment tool, I will say this, that I've worked with many clients who have provided me with assessment tools provided by a state security director or a local law enforcement or a CISA, cybersecurity and infrastructure security provided assessment. And what I struggle with as a professional grant writer using those tools is they're very general in nature. They're not specific. They might be suggested and give the client things to think about, but it still puts the onus on the client to make decisions that they may not be proficient at or understand completely. So for me, the difference between a Sphere State TVA and other more generic TVAs is that it just puts more onus on the nonprofit. And if they are either writing their own grant or hire a professional like myself, it makes it more difficult. It takes more time. The application product isn't as complete or nuanced or specific as I like them to be. Will they satisfy the grant? Yes, because we know that the grant doesn't provide any standard in terms of what is required. But whether or not you think it leads to an increased IQ, helping the nonprofit to change its culture to a more security footing, that's another question. I don't think that these other products necessarily provide the level of detail and specificity to rely on and to go back to, with or without a grant application component, and just in terms of a takeaway tool to use over the next 2 or 3 years, I'm not sure that these other products provide what is necessary.
I'll just jump into the next one. Thank you very much, Rob. I'm not sure if I understood this statement and question correctly, but I think part of it I get. It's difficult when the core group of people is small, which means a lot of work for 1 to 2 people. Also, everything that was said makes a tremendous amount of sense, but not to be negative, how does one convince a board of the importance of doing this? I don't know how you qualified this. Do you mean TVA or do you mean post-award assessments? Let's assume it's both, okay? First of all, the TVA can be done virtually, believe it or not. Nobody has to come to your facility to do your TVA, okay? So that saves a lot of time and money. Secondly, like we've been sharing with you, both Rob and I, through this webinar, there's scales of quality among different TVAs from different providers. Okay, we've been Rob is the guru of the first national grant program for counterterrorism funding for nonprofits. So I cannot think of a better expert in this. That's why you're all subscribers to his newsletter and so on. That's why you follow him. So there's no need to rehash and question credibility in this case. So what I believe works best is when everything is cohesive, everything is very well connected between the TVA and the grant application, particularly if Rob is working on this, and more importantly, the TVA that you should expect should teach you how to do this stuff with minimal risk. If it doesn't give you that guidance, it simply makes an assumption that you know what you're doing. But I can assure you, security is not a trivial matter. It's the same as me trying to become a car mechanic. Okay? I can open the hood of the vehicle. I can open the door. I can open the trunk. That's where my competence stops. Okay? Tell me to go and clean the engine, and I'll start looking around for help. Tell me to change transmission fluid. I'll start profusely sweating and maybe Googling something. Okay, so that's just not my area of expertise. So we understand that majority of nonprofits do not have security practitioners on staff, nor do they have resources for that. So how do you convince the board? You tell the board, do you want this done right? Or do you want this done without us receiving much benefit? Okay, because the lack of benefit is in the fact, yeah, you'll get your TVA from somebody, right? It's going to be called threat and vulnerability assessment, right? And maybe it's going to be free, but you're not going to be enabled to deliver the right security for your community, even if you receive the grant through that TVA. So this is the gap that we see in the current nonprofit system, is that there is, like Rob said, the government does not provide a standard for how a TVA needs to be done, and they should have. They should have, because that is what a lot of organizations are not able to sustain. Even if they do receive the grant, the quality of security controls they're able to source, because they don't have the right knowledge, is very poor, and that creates security theater at the expense of grant money, which is not a good thing. So I hope that that answers your question. And if it doesn't, please, I apologize in advance. You can always reach me or Rob. My email is there. Or Rob, you already know because you've subscribed to them. And so just please don't be shy. You can always reach us, even if right now we may not have addressed your question completely. If there's nothing else, I think we're just exceeded the hour. Rob, do you want to close it off?
I do. And before I do, I just want to acknowledge that, yes, I agree that the program can be very complex and frustrating and scary for the uninitiated. I do understand that many organizations only have one or two folks, volunteers who step up to do this important work. That's why I put out what I put out regularly. I try to help the do-it-yourselfers, for those that can afford my services, or folks like Ilya. It's definitely easier for them, I would say. I would say this too, that if you had to choose between a grant writer and a vulnerability assessor, I would pick the vulnerability assessor as the investment, because I still believe that the TVA is the cornerstone for all aspects of security going forward, and that I think that that's a tool worth having, more so than having a grant writer. With that said, this presentation will be posted and shared. Hopefully, I can also share your PowerPoint, Ilya, with folks. Any questions we didn't answer, please just shoot me a note, and I'll make sure that we respond. And down the road, if you need any particular advice or guidance around these issues, please reach out.
Thank you all, and thanks for your time. We're always available to you via email, phone. Just don't hesitate. Thank you for your attention. Have a great rest of your day.